All right. So, first of all, thank you so much to all the students who submitted the survey and gave me a lot of feedback and suggestions. So I'm gonna slowly implement most of them in my teaching moving forward. And again, if you have any more suggestions, please don't be shy. Send them to me by email. So yeah, in terms of feedback, if you would like to give me more feedback on a weekly basis or something, please feel free to just send me an email. Um, Otherwise, I was really happy with what I saw, and especially with the fact that almost 80% of my students participated in this class. So thank you so much. Just a heads up, so this week we're gonna have a test based on this unit. This was a short one. I'm just gonna cover a few concepts that we've kind of touched on. So it shouldn't be too difficult. And then I think I'm only going to be posting 2 videos this week, so I'll give you Wednesday to review, and then on Thursday I'll hold office hours, and then on Friday you'll have your test. Okay, so not a quiz but a test. Some students were also talking about having a review for the final exam. So just I want to remind you one more time that there is no final exam. All the assignments that you're handing in are counting towards your final exam grade. Okay, so there is no final exam because everything that you're doing is basically your final exam. Okay, so just make sure to continue handing in your work because most of you are doing really well. Okay, especially those of you who are handing in your work. Yeah, anyway, so starter question, right? Just provide a quick sketch of this quadratic function and find the roots. So don't worry about P and Q over here, okay? Just find the roots and then use the roots and the fact that you're, right? So let me just, I mean, the other values are not important. I'm just only going to focus on A. So if the coefficient of x squared is not visible, it's actually 1. So that means your A value is 1. Now, because this is positive, right, that means your parabola will open upwards. Okay, so it will look something like that. Okay, so because it's a sketch, we don't have to be super precise. So this is how I would do it. I would just see if factoring works, right? So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -3 and they have to add up to -2. Okay, so 1 times 3 is 3. One of them has to be negative, so the bigger one has to be negative because this is negative. Okay, so 1 minus 3 is -2. So this is how I would factor this. Okay, so I'm looking for the roots. That means I'm going to have to replace f of x by 0, right? I'm looking for when is my function equals to 0. And then I'm going to use factoring to solve this. Okay, so x plus 1, x minus 3, right? Which means that if you solve for x, which I'm not going to do because it should be fairly obvious by now, x is either equals to -1, right? Or x is equals to 3, okay? And this is how you would sketch this quadratic function, okay? So let me make this a little neat, okay? So something straight. And maybe let me just extend this. Okay. So this is your x, this is your y. Your function, the 0 of the function, this is like, for example, is, so let's say if this is 1, right? So let's say this is 1, 2, 3, right? So this is -1, -2. At -1, my function is at 0, and at 3, my function is at 0. And I know that my a value is positive, so the parabola, right? And you can kind of find the p-value, right? The p-value has to be the average, so this is where your p has to be, right? So 3, right? Remember, how do you find the average? Just add this two numbers and divide by 2, so that's -1 plus 3, which is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So my P will be somewhere over here, but I don't know what the Q value is. So again, you're just sketching, so no one really cares about the Q value. And this is what your sketch will look like, okay? So something like that. Don't worry about the precise Q value, okay? P is obviously 1. So this is your vertex P comma Q, and you can easily find those values, right? Now that you know that P is equals to 1, if you really want to find Q, if it's really bothering you, Q is just equals to F of P. Okay, in other words, Q is equals to F of 1. So plug 1 into your function, and whatever value pops up, that will be your Q value. Okay, so in this case, if let me just quickly do this mentally. So 1 squared is 1, minus 2 times 1, so minus 2, and then minus 3, so minus 5, maybe minus 4 or something. Okay, so I think if I did my mental math correctly, it might be minus 4. Okay, so again, you don't need to find all these values, but just to refresh your memory. Okay, so this is basically what the sketch looks like. Okay, now this sketch is very important because our focus for this class will be to figure out when my function is positive or negative. Okay, and in this case, be very careful. In this case, you're either going to have a inequality. Well, you're always going to have an inequality, but some of them will be strict, some of them will not be strict. What do I mean by strict and not strict? See, this one includes an equal sign. Okay, so this one means that I'm including the zeros. But if I have something like less than 0, like less than, or strictly greater than, these guys don't have an equal sign underneath. So in that case, you will not include your 0, okay? And I'll do a few examples to kind of like highlight that. So how do you do a question like this? Again, if you want, this question kind of bothers you, then just make, because it's already less than 0, right? So make this, right? So let f of x equals to x squared minus 10x plus 16. Okay, so it's kind of like we're working with this function. Okay, I'm just changing this into a function, just to kind of like, make it easier for you to understand what we're actually doing. Okay, so also another thing to sorry, another thing to, I guess, um, to point out here is that you only have one variable, okay, which is x. So this is an inequality in one variable. So again, this we've done this before, but next class we're going to do inequalities in two variable, which is slightly challenging because then your solution will actually be a region, not just um, in this case your solution will be an interval, basically, okay, a set of numbers. But in the next class, as you'll see, your solution will actually be a region. Okay, so anyway, so how do you work with a question like this? First thing you need to do is find out when f of x is equals to 0. Okay, so find your roots. Okay, so 0. Okay, so find your x-intercepts, right? This basically means find your x-intercept or find your roots. Okay, so this find your roots, because they will help you determine when the function is positive and negative. And in this case, I have to show you how to do this question in multiple ways. Okay, and you're familiar with one of the ways. Okay, so basically my question becomes, but instead of answering this question, I'm going to change this inequality to equal sign, right, to an equality, and then I'll graph the function, and then using that visual aid, I will answer this question. Okay, so um, x squared minus 10x plus 16, right? So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 16, but add up to minus 10. So let's see, 8 and 2, right? Both of them negative. Um, sorry, there should be 2. So that means this factors to x minus 8 and then x minus 2, which means that, my zeros are at x is equals to 8 or when x is equals to 2, okay? Again, I'm just solving this. Either this is equals to 0, right? So if you solve for x, then you're going to get x is equals to 8, or that is equals to 0, right? And when you solve for x, you're going to get x is equals to 2, okay? So I'm just quickly doing this because we've been doing this for a while now, okay? Now, my a value is equals to 1. It's positive, so my parabola will open upwards, right? And I can just quickly sketch this, right? These are my two. So one of them is at 2. Now, this is the thing that I'm going to point out, super important. When you have an inequality that is not strict, so that does not have an equal sign, then put your dot. So one of the dots will be a 2. Put a shaded dot. Okay, that means you're including this value. But if it's a strict inequality, then I'm going to ask you to put an open dot. That means you have to ignore that value. Okay, so I'm going to put 2 shaded dots, right? One of them will be at 2, the other one will be at 8. And then because my function is opening upwards, this is what the function looks like, okay? So I'm probably going to have to add an extra page over here. So using this, this is your x, this is your y. So using this picture, I know when my function is negative. Okay, my function is negative over here, and it is negative, right? Again, you have to express your your answers in terms of x. So it's negative between 2 and 8. Okay, but because remember these dots are shaded, so you have to include those values. Okay, so that means x is sandwiched between 2 and 8, but make sure you're putting this equal sign because you're including the 2 and the 8. Okay, there will come a question that I'm going to go over where you don't have to include these values. Okay, so as you can see, this is one way of doing this question, and it's honestly it's probably the longest way of doing it. Okay, the best way of doing this question, so this is, let's say this is maybe let's say method 1. Okay, so I'm just gonna put a 1 and put a circle. Now I'm going to show you a second way of doing it. Okay, second way is you don't have to graph, but you still have to do all this work. Okay, so you have to do all the work up till this point. Oops, all the work up till here. Okay, you need to know what your roots are. Okay, doesn't matter which method you're using, you need to know what your roots are. Okay, so the second method is once you know what the roots are, right, you're gonna put a number line. If it's not a strict inequality, right, if you have an equal sign, then make sure you're putting shaded dots at 2 because your first root happens at 2 and your second root happens at 8. Okay, so let me just kind of like put a, maybe let me use a different color and show you that this is where the methods differentiate. Okay, starting from this point. So this is method 1 basically, if you want. Okay, so it doesn't matter which method you're using, you'll have to do all this work. And then for method 1, you have to actually, you know what, let me just erase this one. And then yeah, so this is method 1. This here is method 2. Okay, I'm just going to be consistent with my colors. Method 2, right? You have your 2x intercepts or your roots. Okay, you're using a number line. Now what you need to do is you know that your function will either, so between the two x intercepts, so between here, your function will either be positive or negative. Okay, and then after your x-intercept, it will either be positive or negative. You don't know which one it is, okay? But you know that your signs will only flip once you hit the threshold, right? So your function will only flip signs after it crosses the threshold, which is the x-intercept, okay? But how do you know what the signs are? Okay, so what you have to do is you have to find a value. You have to pick a point between 2 and 8. Okay, so it could be anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find the y value of my function. Okay, so I need to find, so I'm going to use the point 3 because 3 happens to be between 2 and 8, right? So I need to find f of 3 and see if it's positive or negative. Okay, so f of 3 means that I need to replace 3 in this equation. So let's do that. F of 3 is equals to, so let me just recopy f of x. It's x squared minus 10x plus 16, so f of x. is equals to x squared minus 10x plus 16. So once I find f of 3, so f of 3 will equals to 3 squared minus 10 times 3 plus 16. Okay, and I'm hoping that this is going to be a negative number. Okay, so 3 squared minus 10 times 3 plus 16 gives me minus 5. Okay, because this is negative, that means the entire interval, right, between 2 and 8, everything has to be negative, okay? And then this is where your function will switch signs after 8, okay? It could either be positive or negative. Why? Because look, if your function is negative over here, right, based on the number line, I know that my function is negative over here. My function kind of has two options. Either it can become positive after 8, right? So either it can become positive, or sometimes functions behave a little weirdly. Some of the functions will just hit the 0 and then they could come back down, right? Which is possible. It's still a function. So you kind of have two options. Either it's going to be positive or negative. How do you know which one it is without even drawing the picture, without even looking at the picture? Well, you just have to find a value that's greater than 8, okay? So I'm not going to do this because again, I don't want this video to be too long. So here I picked 3 because 3 was between 2 and 8. Here pick another number. Okay, you could pick 9 or 10. Find f of 9 and you'll see that it's positive. Okay, so this has to be positive. And same thing over here. Find f of anything that's less than 2. So f of 1 and you'll see that this is also positive. Okay, and this is where the signs are coming from. Okay, so that's the second way of doing it. Okay, so that's kind of like the second method. Um, and there's actually one more way of doing this, and I'm going to show you that as well. So you have the third method. Again, you'll have to draw a number line. Okay, and this is even faster, but this might confuse some of you. So 2, 8, okay? And you know that this is what your function looks like. F of x is equals to, what is it? X minus 8, x minus 2, okay? X minus 8, x minus 2, okay? Like, so make sure you're using the factored form, okay? So this one, you don't use this one. This is not going to help you. You need to have this form, okay? The factored form. Okay, so this is how you do it. Okay, so let's say if I pick a number between 2 and 8, I'm going to have to do the same thing, but I'm not going to calculate its value, kind of like what I did over here. I'm only interested in the sign. Okay, so let's say if I pick a number between 2 and 3, sorry, 2 and 8, and let's say that number is 3. Okay, so I'm choosing 3 as my point. So what you need to do is this, just replace x by 3. If I replace x by 3, then this bracket becomes negative, right? Because 3 minus 8 is a negative number. I don't care what the value is. I know it's minus 5, but I know that it's negative, okay? And if I place 3 over here in this bracket, then 3 minus 2, I know it's 1, but don't worry about the answer. Just worry about the sign. So my sign is positive, right? Because 1 is positive. And brackets means you're multiplying. So basically, if you plug in 3 in here and in here, one of your brackets will end up becoming negative, the other one will end up becoming positive, and you're multiplying the two. When you multiply negative by positive, right, the negative always wins. Okay, so you just need to remember that. Okay, so negative times positive is always negative. Positive times positive is positive. Okay, and negative times negative is also positive. So you just kind of need to know how your signs work. So that means, right, that means that this interval has to be negative, okay? And the advantage of doing this, I think this is a faster way, is because you can pick any value, okay? In this case, I'm not, you could pick anything, but I'm actually going to pick, because I can pick my point to be anything. So I'm going to pick a really big number, like 100, let's say, okay? Because this is going to help me. Because if I'm picking my test point to be 100, it's fine because it has to be greater than 8, right? So 100 minus 8 is obviously going to be positive. 100 minus 2 is also going to be positive. So positive times positive will make this interval positive, okay? Same thing over here. Pick a number that is less than 2, right? In this case, you could pick 0, okay? So if I pick 0, then my first bracket, if I plug 0 in my first bracket, I get a negative number times, right? If I plug in 0 here, I'm going to get another negative number, right? Don't worry about the value. So negative times negative also makes this positive, okay? So in this case, you're not finding the value, kind of like what you did over here. You're not finding f of 3, you're not finding f of 0. You're just interested in the sign, okay? And this is, in my opinion, the fastest one, okay? This is what I do because you don't have to use your calculator or anything, right? You just need to understand how signs work. And for those of you who are not very good at this, just remember that positive times positive is equals to, so maybe let me do this in a different color, okay? So positive times positive is positive, negative times negative is also positive. But if you have positive times negative, the negative will win. Okay, so this is going to be negative, and negative times positive, the negative will win. So this is also going to be negative. Okay, so these are your four possibilities if you want. Whenever you have the same sign, your end result will be positive. If it's different signs, then your result will be negative. Okay, so another way of thinking about it. Okay, so anyway, so I hope that kind of made sense. What I want you to do now is to do this question. This is on page 478. This is the answer. Some students were asking me to display the answer because, it's kind of like hard to flip the pages in the textbook. So work this out. Again, it has to be negative. Again, it's not a strict inequality, which means you have to put this, equal sign underneath. Okay. And this is kind of like, the notation that your textbook uses, right? So this is what they use in diploma. Um, I mean, again, you need to know how this notation works. I guess how to read this notation. Okay, this reads as x. This line over here stands for such that x is between -1 and 3. X belongs to the real numbers. Okay, you need to know how to read this notation. But on a test, if you're not using this notation and you're just doing what I should have done, I guess, because I haven't really answered the question, right? So, or did I? Oh, I did. Okay, so this is my answer, right? X is between 2 and 8. It's fine. Okay, I'm gonna give you full marks for this. But yeah, but just understand how to read this notation. Okay, so this one you need to know what it says or how to read it. Okay, so another question. Okay, this one's kind of hard. Why? Because your coefficient is not 1, so you can't really use the shortcut, okay? Here, your a is equals to -1. Remember, your shortcut when you factor only works when a is equals to 1. So what we're going to do is, your textbook does this a little differently. And again, you can have a look at that, okay? But what I'm going to do is, your textbook actually factors the -1, right? They factor the -1. So this becomes x squared minus 3x minus 10 is less than 0. And then they're going to factor this, okay, which is fine. But then you're carrying this extra sign for no reason. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, I mean, you could do that if you like. And again, if you look at page 480, you can see the solution over there. But what I'm going to ask you to do is just multiply both sides by -1. So I'm going to multiply this side by -1. Okay, and then I'll multiply this side by -1 because it's 0, right? So, and I can do that, but just in this case, be careful. Whenever you multiply an inequality by a negative number, so what you have to do is just distribute the, I guess, -1, right, inside. So distribute that. When you do that, you're going to get x squared minus 3x minus 10. But whenever you multiply a negative number, you need to switch your inequality. So the sign switches. Sign, like, it kind of like flips. Okay, your inequality flips. And 0 times -1 is still 0. Okay, and the reason for that is very simple. Right? Everyone knows that 100 is less than, 1 is less than 100, right? But if I multiply both sides by -1, then I'm going to have -1, and then I'm going to have -100 over here, right? But, if you think about the number line, right, -1 is actually greater than -100, right? -1 is closer to 0. -100 is way far away from 0, right? So you have to flip your inequality. Okay, so when you do something like that, just be very careful. And now let's just answer this question, which is equivalent to answering that question. Okay, so again, I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -10 and add up to -3. So the two numbers are 5 times 2, right? So -5 times 2 is -10. Yeah, so x minus 5, x plus 2 greater than 0. Okay, so right, um, okay, so this is the question that that I have to answer. But you know what? Just to uh, just I'm gonna erase this because I don't want you to make any mistakes. Okay, so what I want you to do is just change this to f of x is equals to x squared minus 3x minus 10. And then instead of answering this question, answer this question instead. 0 is equals to x squared minus 3x minus 10, right? So 0 is equals to x minus 5, x plus 2. Okay, find the roots first and then use the graph to guide you. And I'm going to show you obviously the other method with the signs as well. Okay, so that means, right, if I solve for 0, that means x is either equals to 5 or x is equals to minus 2. So graphically, right, let me add a new page. So graphically, what will happen is if I graph this function, so remember, this is the function that I'm focusing on, right? So my a value is positive, it's actually equals to 1. And if I graph this, then I'm going to get something like this. Okay, so one of my roots is at minus 2, the other one is at 5. And because my a value is positive, right, that means my parabola opens upwards. So 5. So again, don't worry about the P and Q, just you're just sketching, right? So, and now the question is asking you, when is this function positive, right? When is it greater than 0? So your function is positive over here, right? So let me use a different color. So maybe purple, right? It's positive here and it's positive here, but you're gonna have to answer your question in terms of your x values. For which x values is your function positive, okay? So basically, x, this has to be -2, right? So let me just put a negative here. So your answer is, right, by looking at this picture, x either has to be less than -2 because we're talking about all these values, right? Or x has to be greater than 5 because we're talking about all the values over here, okay, to the right of this number. So that's one way of doing it, okay? So this is, if you want, this is method 1. Method 2, I'm gonna what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna, instead of drawing the function, I'm just gonna write down what the function is. So I know that my function, uh, so let me just use a different color, I guess. Okay, f of x is equals to, in the factored form, it's this, right? X minus 5, x plus 2. Now these are my two roots. So I'm gonna draw a number line and I'm gonna place those values. So just be careful, guys, because I have a strict inequality, right? There's no equal sign underneath. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to put open dots in your number line. Okay, so this one is at -2 and this one is at 5. Okay, and again, they're coming from here. These are your x-intercepts. Okay, so place your x-intercepts in the number line and then go with the signs. Okay, pick a number between -2 and 5. I'm going to pick 0. So if I pick 0 and plug it into my function, right? If I plug 0 into my function, this bracket becomes negative. This becomes positive. So that means my function is negative over here because negative times positive will give me negative. Okay. Now if I pick a number, I need to pick a number greater than 5. So let's pick something really big. Okay, so why don't we pick like 100 again? So 100 minus 5 is obviously going to be positive, and 100 plus 2 is going to be positive. So positive times positive means this has to be positive, right? So I'm just picking big numbers. In here, what you can do is just pick a really small number. Okay, so it has to be less than negative 2. Why don't we pick negative 100? Okay, so negative 100 minus 5 is going to be negative, and negative 100 plus 2 will also be negative. Negative times negative, this also has to be positive, right? And as you can see, this is very quick. You don't have to draw anything. You just need to understand how your signs work. So when is your function positive? Now use the number line to guide you, right? So my function is positive, um, right? I'm looking at over here. It's positive as long as my x values are less than negative 2, right? Or if my x values are greater than 5, okay? So this is how I would answer this question. And again, in the correct notation, right, all you have to do is just put this, I call this the squiggly bracket, okay? So x such that x is less than negative 2 or x is greater than 5, right? Comma, x belongs to the real numbers. And then you close your bracket, okay? I'm not very good at closing the bracket, but whatever, okay? You look something like this. Now, I want you to work with this question, okay? Solution is all obviously given to you. And remember, this is a strict inequality, right? So do it using two different methods. So, I've shown you three methods, whichever ones you like. I think graphing one would be the easiest one, but again, that's the longest one, okay? Because you have to graph a function. You have to sketch it. You don't really have to graph it, but still, it takes a while. And then there's the method of signs, which I really like. Or you could just, you know, find f of 3. So instead of looking at the sign, you're going to look at the actual value. But again, this is too much work for no reason, okay? So again, however you want to do it, go ahead. And then finally, I'm not going to do this. So again, there's the answer. There's also this question. I'm not going to do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out how you need to answer this question. Okay, so as you can see, the problem with this question is that it's not greater than 0. It's greater than 12. Okay, so when you have a question like this, remember, I'm always asking you to find the zeros of your function, right? But in this case, you can't really find the 0 because it's right. If we change this question, right, if the question was greater than or equals to 0, then I always ask you to do this. Change the question into is equals to 0 and then find your roots. But you can't really do this over here. So what you need to do is move the 12. Okay, so do minus 12 on both sides. So the 12 will cancel. Okay, and then the question will change to 2x squared minus 7x minus 12 is greater than 0. Okay, and then let f of x equals to 2x squared minus 7x minus 12. And then find the roots of this function, right? Just be careful, the roots, right? As you can see, these are ugly numbers. That means that you cannot really factor this. You're going to have to use your quadratic formula to find the roots. And then you can quickly sketch this to see when is this function positive, right? So that would be method 1. And then you can draw your number line. Place, remember, because it's the inequality is strict, right? There's no equal sign. You're going to put your two roots here, but make sure you're using um, open circles or the circles that are not shaded. And then, whatever this equals to, find the decimal value of this, okay? So find this in, so if let me just quickly do this. So 7 minus square root of 145 divided by 4, right? The decimal value of this is minus 1.26, close to minus 1.26, right? And the other one is plus. So the other one is 4.76. Okay, so again, this is an approximation, right? Approximately. Now, what you'll have to do is find a value between these two numbers. I'm going to probably pick 0, right? Because 0 is in between. And then over here, again, I'm going to pick something huge like 100 and minus 100 or something, and then just focus on the signs. Okay, so this is how I would do this question. So let me know if this method kind of makes sense. Again, it's supposed to be faster, and once you get the hang of it, honestly, you're not gonna draw functions anymore. Okay, because drawing or sketching functions takes a while, and eventually you're gonna have to work with functions that you um, will not know what they look like, okay, especially in calculus. So you're gonna use all this information to figure out what the sketch looks like. Okay, so this is a more powerful method. So make sure you're yeah, familiarizing yourself with that method. So for homework, um, you know, do these questions. Again, I'm only going to be posting 2 videos this week, so you'll have enough time to practice. Okay, because Wednesday, you can just use Wednesday to catch up on your homework. Thursday, I'll have office hours, and then on Friday, I'll give you your test. Okay. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, please send me an email or join me during my office hours on Thursday. That is it for this class, guys. Have a nice day.